We had a mass shooting the other day in Las Vegas. And 58 or 59, I'm not sure what the count is right now, died. And it's interesting to hear the press go, this is the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. Now, this immediately causes me to ask the question, why did they put the word modern in there? Have any of you asked that question? Why are they always clarifying in modern U.S. history, in modern U.S. history? Well, because it's not the most deadly mass shooting in U.S. history. Not by quite a bit. In 1857, something interesting happened. And the reason I remember some of the details, this became an interesting topic when I guess I was in my 20s, because it's the Mountain Meadows Massacre. I think there was a movie made about it called September Dawn, but it's the Mormons in Utah decided they didn't want some outsiders coming in, so they killed 120 men, women, and children. What they did is, it's a long story, I'll let you look it up. They surrounded them, the Mormon militia surrounded the group of people who were on their way to California. They didn't want to go to Utah, but they were on their way through California. So they surrounded them. The settlers surrendered. They tied up the men they tied each of the men to one of the Mormon militia men. And then at a given signal, all the Mormon militia pulled out pistols and executed the men that were there. Then they hunted down and killed all the women and all the children that they thought would be old enough to identify anybody who was there. It's approximately 120 men, women, and children. This was not spraying a crowd. This was actually killing people specifically because of that. That happened in 1857. And you go, oh, but that's horrible. That happened there. It was history. The reason it became an issue was there was the question of what was going to happen to the site. It's where all this occurred. And should this be on the National Register and so on. Anyway, that was the real challenge about that one. Now, but they go, oh, that's so long ago. That's so long ago. Well, yes, but then we go to 1890. And 1890 is the battle or massacre of Wounded Knee. Now, the reason that I remember a little bit about this was when I was in high school in 1973, the Native American Indians took over the site there and held it for 71 days. And I remember the press portraying this as a really awful thing that the Indians had done by taking over the site. And until recently, I didn't really know much about it, so I did a little bit of research. And I'll leave that for you if you want to go look up Wounded Knee. But in Wounded Knee, this one has some real interesting parallels to what's happening in the discussion about Las Vegas. In 1890, the U.S. Army slaughtered somewhere between 150 to 300 North American indigenous population, say American Indians. They slaughtered them. Now, why did they slaughter them? That's the interesting question. It's because they wanted to take away their weapons. And the Indians basically said, you can have my rifle when you pull it from my cold dead hand. And they did. And they slaughtered some. The low number is 150, the high number is 300. The higher number is actually considered more accurate because that was what they paid civilians to come in and to bury the dead who had frozen to the ground, and they charged them basically on how much effort it was. And that's why that they said historians, and many historians say it's close to 300. So that's our army. That's what our American army did. They were given the order to disarm these people, and they didn't want to give up their guns. So those who in say gun rights, oh, we would never come and confiscate your guns. 1890. We did. And it resulted in a massacre of between 150 to 300 people. Because we tried to take guns away from people who owned them. So, we take a look at all these people going, oh, it would be terrible if we took a... The other thing that bothered me about Wounded Knee, you do the research, what did the Army have when they slaughtered the American Indians? Now, 25 American soldiers were killed. Well, they had a version of the Gatling gun. But this wasn't the little version of the Gatling gun, firing 50 caliber rounds, which was the first one that was out there. No, this was the version of the Gatling gun that had 37 millimeter rounds. So let me give you a concept. The A-10 Warthog fires 40 millimeter rounds. And they were 37 millimeter, a little bit smaller rounds, firing at people who didn't have any body armor really, who were coming at them with rifles and such. Can you say a lopsided battle? Can you understand why the Indians who were fighting to keep their weapons didn't survive? That was one that shocked me, was the fact you have to look up the gun, and I can't remember the gun. You can look it up if you look up Wounded Knee, and you'll find what kind of guns that we had, the American soldiers had, and then take a look at what those guns actually were. They were Gatling guns. They were 5-barrel Gatling guns firing 37 millimeter rounds. This was not just 37 millimeter rounds. Look that up. Get an idea of how big and nasty a 37 millimeter round would be against a person. So we slaughtered, that was the American Army slaughtered only 150. That's 150 dead. There were survivors, but most of the, in both of these two situations, most of the wounded died. If you were wounded, you basically died. So when they say that the shooting in Las Vegas was the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history, they don't want to talk about these two. They don't. The press doesn't want to acknowledge that this is not the worst shooting in U.S. history. They don't want to talk about Wounded Knee. They don't want to talk about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which were worse if you want to go by body count. Mountain Meadows Massacre was, it's very similar. Though people were executed, all these people were executed, and they hunted down the women and children. And with Wounded Knee, we were using 37 millimeter rounds against people with, single shot rifles. And this is 1890. So we've had some interesting things. As I say, America, right or wrong, right? America is my country. I am a very strong patriot, but I recognize that my country has done some horrible things in the past. People go, oh, they talk about World War II, about rounding up the Japanese and putting them in internment camps. Well, most of them survived. And what we did was awful. There's no excuse for that. But what we did to the Native Americans was much worse. And maybe I'll do another video someday about just how bad the United States has been. I have no blinders on. I know that we are a truly nasty country. We've done some horrible things in the past. And Wounded Knee is an example of one. And it was a massacre by the U.S. military trying to disarm people because we had decreed that this group of people did not have the right to have weapons. Now, it's interesting. I think it wasn't until 1924 were all Native Americans U.S. citizens. So what would happen, an interesting analogy, is if we said all undocumented aliens in the United States, just like the American Indians, they're a group, they're undocumented, they were not citizens, couldn't have weapons. And we would come in and take them away. And if worst case, if they put up any resistance, we would execute them. We did it to the Indians at Wounded Knee. Just a little bit of food for thought for those people who are crying, oh, we have to stop all these weapons, we have to take them all away. Well, I have a real problem with that. First off, I don't trust our government because they've got a history, they've got a past that you can look at and see what we've done in the past. And that's the thing that scares me the most, is most people don't know their history, don't know about these massacres, and the press is deliberately couching their phraseology so that not to remind people of them, not to make people think, not to make people go looking. When I looked up mass shootings in the United States, these don't show up on any of the lists, but they are. They're mass shootings. 120 people killed at the Mountain Meadows Massacre. At least 150, maybe 300 people killed at Wounded Knee. So if you think our government is all sweetness and light, you don't know our government. So I don't trust our government to take the weapons away, which is why the Second Amendment says, that you have the right to keep and bear arms, because you have the right to resist the government. And our government has a proven track record of being quite brutal. And those of you who don't know that, I feel sorry for you. You don't trust our government. It doesn't mean you don't love our country, you don't love our government, but what happens is it's like having someone that you lived with who has a background that you don't want to think about. You've someone who in the past lied to you, someone in the past who did terrible things. You don't want, you may still love them and live with them, but you have to understand the limitations and be concerned about that. And that's why I decided to put this video together, because people are going, we have to do something. And we're looking to the government to impose some new laws or some new restrictions. Well, let's see what our government has done in the past with those type of restrictions and those type of orders. So I hope I've made you think a little bit. Different perspective. What happened in Vegas is horrible, and I pray for those people. But I am very concerned that the media is hiding our history because they don't want to talk about these horrible things. So thank you for watching my video.